Hi, ever wonder what it's like to work another profession or live in the underworld? Listen to unsuspecting riders give a 10 to 15 minute personal masterclass as I spontaneously interview them as they enter my taxi. I'm your host, Simon Rushton, and this is Taxi Chronicles. Morning. Yes, we're back with another episode, another rider. Today we have a recruitment person. His name is Bob. You know what that means if you're a regular listener. It's Mr. Anonymous time. Anyway, he's going to tell us all about social work and the recruitment industry and everything we need to know. So if you need a job, I suggest you listen to this one. And especially if you're experienced with young people, you may be in the money. So nice to have you here today, Bob.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So first of all, what got you into the recruitment industry? How did you end up
in recruitment?
Yeah.
So initially I thought about actually becoming a social worker. I realised quite quickly it wasn't for me in terms of the pressures of it, in terms of being able, it's not a 9-to-5 job. You're always on call, and you're dealing with people's lives essentially. So I knew from that moment it wasn't really for me, but I wanted to do something in relation to it. And a few of my friends at the time were recruitment consultants for different markets. And I thought, you know what, I've got an interest in this one area. So I thought, let me give it a try. And that's kind of how I fell into social care recruitment. So yeah, that's how.
How long have you been in the industry?
So I've been doing it for 6 years now.
Okay. And how would you say it's changed over your period of time?
I'd say there's been a lot more pressure. So when I say pressure, I mean in terms of social workers. So it's it's a small market. Everybody knows each other in terms of from social work, especially within London in particular. Most social workers would know of each other or know someone that knows somebody. Or it's all quite relative.
Small world, like
a
village world.
Yeah, really, really small.
Okay.
But I'd say the pressures of recently, I would say since I first started, it's shrunk quite a bit. I'd say that there's an excess of social workers leaving the industry due to the pressures which I think all local authorities are feeling.
I always associate social workers for children.
Yeah.
Is that what it is, or do you get social workers for adults as well?
Both. We get adults and children. I predominantly focus on children, but I do cross over with adults as well. So yeah, but it's such a big area in terms of social work. You've got different specialisms essentially. You've got looked after children, child protection, children in need, referral and assessment, MASH, quality assurance. It's quite varied and it's quite similar in terms of with adults as well, but just slightly different names and services that they cover.
When you're recruiting, what are you actually looking for?
It depends on what the client's asking for. So essentially, if the client's asking for someone who's, say, a children with disabilities social worker, and they need them on a contract basis, then you're ideally looking for someone specifically who has the skill set. So they need to have had to work within a children with disabilities team, and even then it could be that with the children with disabilities team, it could be 0 to 25 years. So it varies in terms of what the client's looking for, to be honest.
Oh, so 0 to 25 years of experience?
Age range of children with disabilities. Okay. So the 0 to 25 usually would be transition, so transitioning from children with disabilities over to adults with learning disabilities. So it's totally dependent on what the client's looking for. Okay. Totally dependent on what the...
What would you say you've learned that you wish you knew when you started in this industry?
Oh, that's a good one. I knew it was going to be challenging going into it, but I think if there's one thing I need to learn was building better relationships with people at the very beginning. That was the hardest thing I found. It takes time to build up trust with people, and that's essentially what you're doing in recruitment as well. You're becoming a trusted advisor to people in terms of pointing them in the right direction in terms of their career, whether they want to maintain or they want to grow. Or it's about connecting people as well, I suppose. So I think definitely the one thing I think
you say there's a demand, because obviously people are leaving the industry.
Yeah.
Do you find yourself headhunting a lot more?
Yeah, absolutely. So I used to focus predominantly on the senior market. When you're doing the senior stuff, it is a lot more headhunting. So it's depending on what the Ofsted's like with the local authority, they could be looking for a specific person with a specific set of skills. It totally depends on what the client wants. So you can have somewhere where they just want bums and seats, and that's always the wrong approach. You want people that are going to go in and make changes to children's lives, I suppose.
Why would they just want bums and seats?
Depends on the local authority you're working with. So some local authorities, because of the pressures that they're under, so I've had it where you've got a local authority where they need 15 social workers in one team, which is anyone who, if you're a social worker and you hear that, the immediate concern would be that you're going to have caseloads that are really high, like really, really high. So you could be having cases somewhere between 30 to 40 children, which is unmaintainable.
So one social worker would have 15 to 30 children.
In a local authority that's struggling, absolutely. Usually a good indication of how what I like to think, one of the indications I like to look at in terms of if it's a stable environment for people to go into is caseloads. So when you get people on, say, 12 to 15, it means that you're usually working within a good local authority. So it's quite a stable environment. Don't get me wrong, pressures can change over time, so it might slightly increase, but ideally you want to maintain. But it totally depends on the needs of the family. Sometimes it could be that you get a case that's long term, or other times you can get something that's quite short term. There's a lot of variables. I think with social work in particular, you're dealing with some uncertainty.
So with that, if they're demanding something like that, somebody with any kind of experience would realise, and they're going to demand that the envelope's pushed or the bar's pushed in regards to pay.
Yeah.
How much would you say the pay has increased over the years?
So again, it depends on where you're working. So if you're doing, say, a project team, so you're project teams in particular, they are brought in specifically because to alleviate stress off the services. So it varies. Some places can pay, say, £40 an hour. Other places can pay up to, say, £48 an hour. And then with those as well, with the outside, if you're working with London social workers and these roles are outside of London, then they can get accommodation costs with that as well. So it could go up to, say, £150 a week extra. And if they put it outside of IR35, then obviously you're paying less tax as well. But usually project teams shouldn't really be outside of IR35. This is just things that I've heard in the market, that they have got project teams outside. But though, it makes things a bit more risky for the social workers. So that's why I would never ever steer in that direction, essentially.
You said you realised social work wasn't for you.
Yeah.
But you spend your life so far encouraging people to be in the industry.
Yeah.
How do you do that?
I think it's depending on who you're working with in particular. So for me personally, I like to look for people who are quite passionate about what they're doing. The one thing as a consultant is you don't want somebody that's just there for money. You want it because you want to find somebody that you know wants to have the best possible outcomes for children.
Someone with a story.
Yeah.
So I interviewed the social worker, I think 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
No, one was last week, sorry. And she said because she was a young mum, a teenage mum, she realised that her support she had from her mother was impeccable.
Yeah.
and that she wanted to make sure other people, so she ends up working till 1 a.m. at times, because she really cares about the kids. So you want someone with a personal story like that, I think.
Yeah, no, definitely. When you first start talking to people, they're not very open. But when you start to get to actually know them as an individual, rather than just being somebody that you just called to see if they want a job, it kind of changes, and then you get to find out a bit more about what brought them into social work. So my aunt, when she got into it, she said she didn't like the way that black people were being perceived and represented within local government, essentially. And the outcomes for children were very different compared to, say, white British nationals, essentially. So her reasoning to getting into it was she wanted the best possible outcome for people who look like her, essentially. So it's finding out stuff like that, and it becomes quite more interesting when you start to find out what their purpose is within the role. So yeah, it's kind of how I like to do it, is just find out what makes them tick, essentially. Why is it they're in social work?
Okay. So if you hire, do you also fire?
No. So we're sheerly just introducing a client to people that we've worked with or think would be a good match for the organisation that they're representing. I've never had to fire anybody or anything like that. It's sheerly just introducing, essentially.
You speak of a high demand.
Yeah.
So for people who've been fired before by another local authority, do you give them a second chance and recruit them, or are they kind of blacklisted for life?
No, it totally depends on what it was. So if it's anything in relation to the endangerment of children, then that's somebody that I personally wouldn't want to work with again. But it totally depends on, so obviously, you've got stuff like HCPC, Healthcare Professional Council. Oh, sorry, they're not called HCPC anymore, sorry, they're called Social Work England.
Okay.
So they are like a board of social workers, essentially. So if there's anything like concerns in terms of practice or anything like that, then it would be investigated via them. And they would make the decision on whether or not they're suitable to actually practice social work anymore. So that's usually you would want to use that anyway as an indicator whether or not it's somebody you should be working with.
Or whether their licence would be revoked, assuming they have the licence. Now that board, you spoke about being represented.
Yeah.
Is it a mixture of different backgrounds, ethnicity, or is it just like white British people?
No, I think it is a mixture. I think it's a mixture of everybody. I think anyone can do it, I believe. Not anyone, but I think people with a social work background, essentially, could be part of Social Work England.
Qualifications wise, what do you need to be considered as a social worker on your recruitment basis?
So you need to, if you're going to be a social worker, you have to go do, I believe they made it a degree now. Well, it is a degree now. So usually you have to do, say, 3 years worth of studying. And within those 3 years, they tend to, you're always in placements throughout the 3 years.
So it's like a sandwich.
Not really, so it's still 3 years, but I know that you'll do, I think
experience.
30 days, 60 days, and then 100 days in your last year.
And you're shadowing somebody.
You're shadowing and practicing as well, essentially. So you'll have somebody that's mentoring you, just keeping an eye on your work. So it's
okay. That's interesting. That's really, really good. Do you see how do you see the future of this industry going? Because obviously if people are dropping off because the stress is too much, and sadly we're getting more and more, I'm not sure if you call ASBO children or what have you. What's the future? What do you think? Because you see it. You may not be directly part of it, but you see it.
It's a very hard thing. It's a hard question. The reason I say that is I feel that the central government itself are stripping away resources from social work. And because of that, it's making people walk away from the industry. And I can see when you've worked with people for a long time and they're starting to move away from the job, it's not that they don't want to do it, it's that the
reward
it
doesn't amount to...
I don't think it's the reward of it. I think it's not being able to get the best possible outcomes for children when you know that the local government should be investing more.
It's like you're on the battlefield, and someone's only giving you a minimum amount of ammunition. Yeah,
that's literally it. You know that it's not
so
sustainable.
You're never going to be able to do the proper job.
Yeah,
you need to do. But they want you to do it.
I think you get some local authorities within, like, so you can see the more affluent local authorities tend to not have the same issues as local authorities with less income. Essentially, it's very, very different pressures. So if you look at, say, Newham Council, the pressures there are very, very different to, say, somewhere like Richmond Council. You look at population size as well, is very, very different.
Richmond's got, but mind you, is Newham bigger?
Newham's huge. It's a really big local authority. And what you tend to find, I find, is that
they go all along the Thames, don't they?
Yeah.
They're like down Canning Town, Silvertown.
Yeah.
Going all the way down
Stratford.
to Beckton. Is it Beckton? Yeah.
So it's this huge. The pressures of those services are very different depending on where you are.
They're building a lot of nice flats.
Yeah, they are around that area.
It's in the middle of nowhere, but yeah, okay. But in Richmond, it's going to be hard to get to.
Yeah.
Hard to.
But I think, going back to what you were saying, I think it's just. I think I can see a bit more of an exodus of staff people leaving the profession.
So that means more crime then?
I wouldn't say more crime. It's
who's going to handle the children then?
Clearly
the parents
question.
aren't.
Yeah, the parents aren't. It's a very hard question. I don't know who. It's hard to attract someone to a profession when. It's very hard to attract people to a profession where you don't get. How I look at it is very hard to attract people to a profession when the media continuously slaughter you. Yeah. And I think the only time we ever hear about social workers in the UK is when something's gone wrong. Yeah. When the reality is don't get me wrong, anything that happens is bad. Yeah. But
they don't turn around and blame the government and say, well, government took our funding.
Yeah.
They say social workers bad.
Yeah. And it's like you're fighting a battle with a hand behind your back essentially in social work. And that's why I reckon you'll get more and more people as time goes on leaving the profession.
I'll tell you what I see as more important.
Yeah.
There was a time where all the old school police retired or left. So you had all this new wave of young police, but they had no experience.
Yeah.
And so what they did, they started to ask people of a certain age, who are 40 and over, can you come and join the police? Knowing that they would have a short career, because what they realised is they needed people with life experience.
Yeah.
Because the young police were like early 20s.
Yeah.
And they didn't understand about life yet, really, and what to really make an issue and how to handle things. And I see that the same with this social work, that if the veterans are leaving, then even if you're getting new people coming in, who's going to really train them properly? Because it's not a thing you just get on the job training as with no guidance. You need somebody, you need an old sweat to say, no, you don't do that, you do this, or consider this, or consider that. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's what I would see as the bigger problem, because you're going to take whoever else is left as an old sweat, and they're going to have 5 people to mentor, or 10 people to mentor, and their big caseload as well. And it's going to be too much.
Yeah, definitely.
That's what I see as the issue. But anyway, apart from that, I'll ask you the last question I always ask my guests.
Yep.
It's been very interesting, very informative.
Yep.
What's the impact you want to have on the world?
Ooh. I always like to think you want to leave this place better than it was when you came. But how I do that is interesting. How I want to do it, I suppose. That's something I'm still thinking about, I suppose.
Okay, well that leads on to a naughty extra question.
Yeah.
Do you see yourself staying in recruitment for social work?
No, I think if anything, it's opened me up to other being within social, like recruitment, in particular social work. It's opened up other things for me. So I've spoken to quite a few commissioners, and that's something that I'm thinking of potentially getting into, which is.
So when you say commissioners,
so commissioning is quite like project management for social care. So what I'm thinking of possibly do, so they would do, say, contracts for local authorities. So it could be, if you're looking at, say, adults, it could be learning disabilities. So they could be doing like day centres, essentially. So they could be doing all the contract management around that. So that means liaising with providers, essentially. So people or organisations that own the actual centre, but you're liaising with them directly on behalf of the local authority to make sure needs of service users are met within that. So I'm thinking potentially I might look into that for the future. I think long term. I think sales is a very tough environment to be in. I think especially with COVID, it's makes it more challenging. I would say.
So,
I think long term, I think I'll definitely move out. Yeah.
Well, thanks a lot for that, Bob.
No, thank you.
Much appreciated.
Quite interesting.
And we wish you well.
Yeah.
We hope you liked that interview. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to get the latest daily episode. Ever considered investing in the continent with the fastest growing economy and population on Earth? The same continent that holds 30% of the world's known natural resources? Then listen to our sister podcast, Africa Investor Stories, where you will hear real investors with real stories from around the world share their experience of investing in Africa. We post Monday and Thursday at 10 a.m.